So Jared and myself, thanks everybody for watching. We wanted to do another podcast here, and we saw everybody's questions. Really appreciate everybody participating, and we got some really good questions around addiction and how it affects the family and the addict themselves on people getting help. Some really good topics in here, so we want to go through here and just cover everybody's questions the best that we can. So
let's do it. You want to dive right in?
Yeah, let's do it. Absolutely. So starting at the top here, with powerlessness and kind of like the addict's effect on their family and on themselves. So start with the first question. So, why can't you figure out that it's actually your enemy? You going to start on that one, Jared?
Yeah. I think it's tough when you're in the disease. For me, I look back and I was addicted to kind of a variety of things. It wasn't necessarily just the drugs. Like I was addicted to like the hunt for drugs, figuring out how to get the money for the drugs. And when I would try to get clean, I would have this overwhelming feeling of boredom and hopelessness and just what's the point of not doing this, because it just was, my whole life revolved around it from the moment I woke up until the moment I went to sleep. And I just didn't really know what to do once I removed the drugs from my life. So, when you're in a state like that, it's hard to know what your real enemy is because you're miserable without it. I mean, you have no purpose, you have no direction, you have nothing once you remove it. So it's difficult to put that in perspective because you wake up feeling just aimless and hopeless in the morning.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things Jared and I were talking about before we started recording was, that with addiction, nothing is logical. Like for a person who's not an addict to understand why people make the decisions that they do when they're getting high is like, none of it makes sense. It, becomes your identity. It becomes your purpose. It's every day. Your mission is to, get high, stay high or drunk and continue down that path. For me, I mean, I definitely knew it was my Achilles heel. I knew it was the thing that was keeping me from doing the things that I wanted to do in life, and was making me depressed. And it's the reason that I wasn't getting good grades or doing the things that I should have been doing at the time, but I didn't really care. I was just kind of like okay with it. And I think your expectations, you don't really care that it's your enemy. You're just like in it.
Yeah, and these are going to be hard questions to answer because, like you said, a lot of it is not logical. So, because we'll just do our best to frame it in a way that can be helpful to the people asking it. And the biggest thing I would say, if you have somebody who's in that situation, is you have to realize you're powerless, just like they have to realize they're powerless. And there's very little you can probably say or do that's going to help them to identify what the enemy is or what their problem is. It's kind of a journey you have to go on your own. I know for me, I might have been a little bit more delusional than you, Brooks, but I was one of those guys that was convinced that, drugs weren't the problem. I could find a million other reasons why my life wasn't moving in any kind of a direction that I wanted it to. I was real good at making excuses. So for me, I really don't think there was much anybody could say to me to get me to realize what my problem was. It wasn't that. It was my boss wasn't being fair. My family wasn't helping me the way they should be helping me. If you guys would just do what I want you to do, everything would be okay. So I think, from a family's perspective, it's really, you can't negotiate with somebody who's in that frame of mind because they're going to find a way to blame you for everything. And until they find a way to take some ownership of where their life is, unfortunately, you're just kind of stuck. So, you really gotta try to realize that you're powerless just as much as they're powerless.
Yeah, I think that ties into with the next thing about, I don't know, mind denies having disease, talking about, how you could, you were looking at everything else in your life. I think that a lot of times addicts fall into like one of two buckets with that. Like they know they have the disease, they accept it and just sort of embrace it and go full steam into it. And then on the other hand, you have people that are just in total denial. And it's like, no, I don't have a problem. I can control this. The drugs aren't the problem. The drinking is not the problem. I just need to do this or I need to do that. And that makes it really hard on the family as well, because, you want to believe them and you want to like believe that that's the truth too, for your own sanity, I guess. So,
Yeah. And it's tough, because, I know a lot of people who are asking these questions are members of groups like Al-Anon and stuff like that. But that stuff is really true. I mean, all you can really do is stop enabling them until they get to a point where they have to wake up. I'm dealing with this with somebody real close to me right now who's in their addiction, and his family's doing everything they think they can do. But until he realizes and admits that he's got a problem and is willing to do something about it, there's not much you can do there. And don't pay for anything, don't support them in any way until they start showing the behavior that indicates that they're going to start making some changes.
mm-hmm. Absolutely. So touched on like family a little bit. I kind of grouped together. We got a lot of questions around kind of why do you choose drugs or alcohol over our love, like whether in a romantic relationship or over a family. So I think we can segue into those.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
Well, I'll just tell you, for me, that's something I think about a lot because I'm not really sure about that one. I've, once you're in recovery, you look back a lot on things you did when you were in your disease and you try to figure out how you could have done those things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how could you steal from your family? How could you, make those little decisions in the moment? And I guess the best way I can describe it is, in my head, the way I viewed it was, I'm not going to be able to figure this out until I'm not sick anymore. And that was, in that instant moment, it was like, I'm just miserable. I'm not going to be able to make any changes until I get my fix and I'm not this sick. So you make those split second decisions. And I always like kind of equate it to, when you're on a diet or something and you're looking in the fridge and you shouldn't eat the cake, but it's like you eat it as fast as you can before you talk yourself out of it. It's kind of that same thing. Like, I'm just going to do this right now. I'll figure this out after I'm done. Tomorrow I'll figure this out. And it's just that constant not facing what you have to face. And you're not really thinking about how you're hurting the people around you or how it's affecting them. You're just so focused on figuring out how you're going to get those drugs.
Yeah. I think another thing that ties in with is powerlessness. It's like, they're choosing drugs and alcohol over their family, over you, because they literally are powerless to drugs and alcohol. The first step of the 12 steps is, admitting powerlessness, and that it is the first step for a reason. That's the first thing that an addict, alcoholic needs to come to terms with, that like this thing is controlling their life entirely.
Yeah. And I think it's important that we say, to moms, dads, girlfriends, brothers, sisters, boyfriends, it's not your fault. Everybody has to be responsible for their own decisions. And, a lot of times addicts will try to convince you that you're the reason that they're drinking. You're the reason that, because of the way you've treated them or because you're not providing them with the correct opportunities, that's the reason they can't get help. And, that's just the mindset that keeps them in the disease. That really doesn't have anything to do with you. Even if you have made mistakes, in the end, they're responsible for their decisions and you have to hold them accountable for that. I hope that's helpful to some of people, because there are a lot of questions like that. Like, why do you choose the drugs over me. Why, what makes you do this? What,
Or the
you know,
kids or
yeah, or the kids. I mean, and that's sad stuff. And like you and I said, like, God, that makes us sad looking at that, but it has nothing to do with anything external. It really doesn't. And well, I'll say this, in most cases, it doesn't have anything to do with anything external. There are, I think, rare cases of people who are using to, self-medicate for some kind of childhood trauma
or mental.
or mental
Yeah.
illness. I've, in my new job, I used to work in sober livings and now working at a homeless shelter. I would say I see more people on that end of it than I did when I worked in sober living homes. But the thing is, for most people, the solution is the same, regardless of the reason. So a big step in my life was when I stopped trying to figure out why I use drugs and I started getting into action of the solution of, going to the meetings, working the steps, doing the work necessary to start making myself feel better. You can wallow in self-pity for the rest of your life, but it's not anybody else's fault. In the end, you're the one using the drugs. You're the one making the decisions.
Yeah. And there's a part of in AA where they talk about people with grave, like mental, like disorders or dysfunction, being able,
constitutionally incapable of honesty. Yeah.
But they're also talking about, people that even those with like grave, mental disorders and things of that nature are able to help, find recovery if they're brutally honest and follow the steps as well.
Yeah.
So it's, it's the same solution. I definitely agree with that. Yeah. Let's see here. So many times I hear I really have a problem or I need help, but nothing is done. My question would be, why don't you get help? But I would want an answer other than I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I don't know is probably one of the most honest answers you could get out of that question, because that person probably doesn't know why they won't get help. But it's like, it's like anything else in life. It's a pattern. You're stuck in the pattern and you just can't get out. And it's a never ending cycle of, and I said this a little bit earlier, putting it off until tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll start. Next week I'll start. I know when I was in my disease, there was a few moments of clarity where I saw the path that my life was heading down. But for the most part, I was focused only on the moment in front of me. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I couldn't give you an answer of why I was doing it. It was like, I don't know, but right now I'm going to do this and then I'll figure that out later. Right now I'm going to get a hold of my dealer. Right now I'm going to find $40. I'm going to, find a way to get these drugs and then I'll figure it out later.
Yeah. I mean, it's very much like spiritually, mentally, chemically in the brain, everything's super like instant gratification with drug addicts and alcoholics. It's, until somebody gets to the point in, like in AA that you talk about, the desire to stop drinking is like the only requirement for membership. Like when somebody gets from I don't know to like, I don't know, but I want to stop.
Yeah.
I think that's really when like some change can happen, that desperation, that sort of like crossroads,
Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, clearly I'm not a doctor or a scientist or anything like that, but from my experience and working with people who suffer from addiction and suffering from it myself, I'm very convinced that there's a genetic component to it, because I'm thoroughly convinced that regardless of my circumstances growing up, I would have displayed addict behavior in some kind of a capacity in my life. I'm just wired like that. So I feel like it's something you're born with.
Yeah, I agree. That's actually one of these next questions here. Why did you make the decision to drink knowing alcoholics run on both sides of your family, and tell the truth? I know for me, like I remember the first time I got drunk, I knew that, my grandfather was an alcoholic, and, I remember taking the first drink and just feeling incredibly like euphoric and going into the backyard. I was like tossing the bottle and over the fence. because my parents were out of town and we had like gotten into their liquor cabinet and drank this terrible cheap whiskey and got incredibly sick. But anyway, I remember having a sort of moment of clarity when I was all drunk in the backyard, thinking like, oh, this feels really good, and I probably like this a little bit too much, and this runs in my family, so like this could be a problem. Like I remember thinking that the first time.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I my first time that I remember something like that, I was in 8th grade, so I was probably 14 years old, and I was in the hospital. I was sick in the hospital, and the doctor came in and put Dilaudid in my IV. And I remember when it hit me, I immediately texted one of my friends and said, "God, man, if I could take this stuff every day, I would."
Mm-hmm.
And I remember sending that text message because I just felt like that was the state I was supposed to be in. It felt natural for me to be have a altered consciousness, and I searched for that for the next, whatever, 9 years or however long it was.
Yeah. Dilaudid is a painkiller opiate for
Yeah.
everybody that doesn't know. So what is the trauma causing you to drink, and how can I help? So I think we touched on a little bit. Sometimes extreme trauma is definitely the source of like problem drinking, as they call it, like drinking because there's some sort of like stigma, something that's like, making you in pain, and you're finding a solution through drugs or alcohol. I think that the trauma isn't making them drink. It's important to make that distinction. Like, there's people that have trauma that are able to go to counseling and find, healthy ways to deal with it. I think it's, they are choosing to deal with their trauma through using alcohol or drugs. And, if they're in active addiction, they're at a point where like they're powerless, and they found that as the thing that they keep doing to cope. So
Yeah. There's a thing called a positive feedback loop, where when you get caught in it, it's if you use it as an example of somebody in their addiction, it's you feel hopeless, so you get high, and then because you got high, you don't go to work, you steal from people, so you feel more hopeless, so you get high again.
mm-hmm.
And it continues down that path. And there's a lot of different ways people deal with trauma. And I've always had the opinion, and this might be a relatively unpopular opinion, but everybody's trauma is the worst trauma in the world to them. So, when I was an addict, or when I was in active addiction, I could tell you a lot of stories of horrible things, or things I went through in my life that were the reason I was doing the things I was doing. But to be honest with you, my life wasn't that bad. In that point in time, it was an excuse, and I was caught up in that positive feedback loop of just, I had to find a way to justify what I was doing. And I
Yeah.
know, Brooks, you and I went through kind of a hardcore program together. So, one of the things I remember, pretty distinctly about that program was, it helped you rebuild, and I don't like calling it self-esteem, but it helped you rebuild purpose and put together days where you felt good about what you were doing. And to
Mm-hmm.
me, whatever the cause is for where you're at, in most cases, that's the solution, is taking on more responsibility and feeling good about what you're doing. And, I remember somebody telling me once, when I didn't make my bed very well in that program, that, you didn't not make your bed because of your trauma. You didn't make your bed because you're lazy and you didn't want to do it. And,
Mm-hmm.
that was kind of
Yeah.
a wake up call for me. You know what I mean? Like, oh, this excuse isn't going to fly anymore. And, obviously there's people who have suffered immense trauma, and you should be
PTSD, like things like
PTSD,
that.
and
Yeah.
we should all be empathetic for that. But I think most people on the other side who are doing well coping with those things would tell you that, taking on more responsibility, giving back, those are the types of things that help them feel better. And at a certain point, you have to do something about it if you want to be functional.
Hmm.
And that's the decision you have to make when you take ownership of your life. Is, I'm not going to continue to sit in my excuses. I'm going to start to do something productive and start building, a different kind of feedback loop to where I'm actually being productive and being a person that I can be proud of at the end of the day. And that's where you really need to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. Trauma, can be totally legitimate, and it's not the trauma that's like the problem. It's a lot of times it's the way the addict is using it as like a reason to keep going, or as an excuse. And the reality in the real world is, you can't go apply for a job and say, well, I have trauma, so you can't make me do X, Y, and Z, and you can't expect this from me, or, you can't, um, the world, I guess, doesn't necessarily care that you've been through all of these things. So being able to, and I don't mean that in a harsh way, but it's kind of like the way that I think that's reality. And like being able to, like, even though you've been through these things, cope with life and go on and be able to, I think being able to live your life, even with that in your past is like true strength.
Yeah. And even if you could, that's a funny thing is, even if the world, sets itself up for you to make you as comfortable as possible in everything you do, for me, that was never satisfying. And I know you and I relate a lot because, we've got good families who did a lot to put us in positions to be successful.
Hmm.
But inside, I always knew that I wasn't living up to my full potential.
Hmm.
I mean, I didn't. I had a lot of, I had a lot of built-in excuses, and I had a lot of legs up on other people that, I was taking full advantage of. But I knew deep inside that I wasn't living up to my potential, and I didn't feel good about what I was doing. So, if you're using trauma as an excuse, real or not, legitimate or not, there's that voice inside of you that says, you're more than this. You should be doing more than this. You should be being productive and useful. And I think that's something that gets lost along the way. And a lot of, not to speak poorly about all treatment programs, but in a lot of treatment programs, that gets lost along the way. I mean, I
Hmm.
was in a treatment program where, there was a couple people there who would skip all the groups and lay in bed all day because they said they felt depressed. And the counselors would say, "Oh, okay, that's okay. You're
Hmm.
trying your best. You're so brave." And deep down inside, those people didn't feel good about what they were doing.
Hmm.
And, that's going to continue to feed your addiction. It really is.
Yeah. I think you also have the other side of the coin where you have people that are like really successful, or like, have been able to be functional
Yeah.
addicts and alcoholics. I think they're probably outliers in the grand scheme, but um, I think that situation can be particularly like difficult in that regard too, because it's like not everybody is just on the street and like lying and cheating and stealing, and they're probably doing it in other ways, but they're keeping up appearances, and they're very good at doing that, and they've been able to do it for a long time. So there's also that situation as well, and I'm sure some people on the page are dealing with that too.
Yeah, that's a built-in excuse. Those people have the hardest time in programs because they've got all these accomplishments and that they can hold up and say, but look,
Point to, yeah.
I accomplished all this. Like, why would I want to change anything? And, that's some real soul searching to find the reasons, the areas where you do fall short. And you have to focus on the areas where you fall short in order to grow. You have to look at those things, and it's harder the more success you've had in life. It's harder to look
Hmm.
at those things.
Those are the kind of people that can convince you pretty well that they're, everything's fine. And they forget that's because they've done that to themselves. They've, like built that sort of like denial and those self, what do you call it? Like, just lying to yourself over a long period of time.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with somebody who convinces themselves of it every day. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
I mean, they spend all day convincing themselves that they're fine, and how are you going to tell some? And that's why it's really an internal journey. You really have to find your bottom. And
Hmm.
I've never been a big subscriber to, you know, I personally, I can't stand it when people in meetings say, I guess I just haven't found my bottom yet. And it's
Hmm.
like, that's up to you. How bad you want to make your life is your decision. But you could stop when you're not homeless and not on the streets and not close to death or haven't been to 15 programs. But that's a decision you got to make.
Right. So that segues nicely into our next topic, getting help. So had a lot of questions around, going to rehab. How do you guide toward somebody towards, some sort of solution? So, what the first one is rehab the only way out? And we definitely have some thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, no, rehab definitely isn't the only way out. I've seen a lot of people get help through 12-step programs. I've seen people get better through a lot of different avenues. But the real question is the solution usually isn't the one that the addict wants, and I'll throw that out there because I know for me, when I was in my disease, I was going to pick the path of least resistance and the one that was easiest for me. I mean, line up the 30-day treatment centers where I got to do yoga and meditate, and
Hmm.
I would usually end up leaving on more drugs than I came in on. You know, I would pick those over something difficult where I'd have to change every day. So it's really about identifying what you need as an addict, or the family identifying what their loved one needs. What are their character defects, what are they struggling with, and making sure they're in a program, or that they find a solution that's going to deal with the problems at hand. Because a lot of people think that just a 30-day break will be a solution and that they'll be able to stay sober after that, and in most instances that's not the case.
Yeah. There's very few programs out there that aren't, when we're talking about rehabs, that are
Yeah.
not medical based and that aren't like 30, 60, maybe, at the very like long end 90 days. So, um, rehab's definitely not the only way out. I personally think, you're setting up somebody for success in just a normal SLE, like having them, go to meetings, get a job, be held accountable, drug testing, like, um, rather than having them go somewhere to do yoga for 30 days and get on more medication, like you mentioned. And there's definitely a big push right now in the recovery industry to, get people on medication assisted treatment. And, that's something that I think we talked about in the last podcast, and kind of our thoughts on that. It's really substituting one thing with another. And I guess, that is definitely presented as a way out, which is why I'm bringing it up. I think it's, becoming more
Yeah.
like prevalent. And I personally, and I know you feel the same way, think that it's, kind of delaying the inevitable. It's, you're giving somebody a dumbed down version of what they were using before,
Yep.
in hopes that they will, that it's going to satisfy the neurological need for, the dopamine that they've been getting from heroin or whatever opiates they were on, and that it's going to keep them from relapsing. And I think having been on that myself, and known a lot of people that have been on that, it's slowly sort of decreasing your quality of life,
Yeah.
and you're bound to go back to the real thing eventually.
Yeah.
Not to say that there's not people out there that have been able to pull it off and are on that and haven't relapsed, but anyway, that's one solution that I definitely don't agree with.
Well, I'll say, and you and I have talked about this offline, but I think the problem is the way the treatment centers and the way the government as a whole looks at addiction is, you know, they have to be able to define success in my eyes. And, they're looking at it as, most institutions would, as a numbers game of, putting people on replacement drugs like Suboxone or methadone or whatever that replacement may be, lessens the chance of overdose.
Mm-hmm.
It preserves life, which in the medical field is typically, a sign of success. But what I would really be interested to look into is, are these people holding jobs? Are they contributing members of society? Are they happy? Are they present with their families? Are they living a fulfilling life? I mean, for me, that defines success. You may be able to push off down the line somebody relapsing on their drug of choice, but to me, a lot of the people I know who've gone that route, they may have lived longer than they would have, but they're just barely hanging on. They're typically not living up to their potential. They're not satisfied. I think with getting sober, there's that feeling of peace and contentment. AA talks about restless, irritable, and discontent. When you're not working a program, and in my eyes, working a program is being of service, helping other people, living up to your full potential. And a lot of the people I see who are on those types of drugs have that feeling of restless, irritable, and discontent. They're not happy with their lives because they know they're not living up to their full potential.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've had more experience, now working with the homeless population a lot more than I did in the past. And, I've seen people successful using methods that I didn't traditionally think would be successful,
Mm-hmm.
or at least when I started the job that I didn't think would be successful, more of a harm reduction approach where they're lessening their using. But in those cases, I would say what I've seen, and like I said before, I'm not a doctor, is typically those are people who suffer from severe mental illness, who are, on that line of maybe being constitutionally incapable of being honest and working a real program. But for the people who do have that potential, it's rare that I see someone who is happy with their lives, being chained to going to a methadone clinic every day. I don't see that very often.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I definitely think it has its place, is my opinion. Like,
Yeah.
I think, from a harm reduction perspective, like less people dying is good. There's no denying that. Right. I just think presenting it as an alternative method of recovery, and then, saying that you're sober and that you're, like you're in recovery when you're on those drugs. I mean, like, I don't think that is the right way to look at it. Looking at it as like a harm reduction, like this is an alternative, like offering it to the community and having programs like methadone and Suboxone. I think that's a positive thing. Like, people that are on the street, less people are going to die if that option is available. So that just to be clear, like, I don't want more people to die, but I think that, it's just the way that it's being sort of marketed to the recovery community is like, oh, you can be sober and still use this stuff and it's fine, and it's like that. No, I don't agree with that.
Yeah, and there's no question it has its place. Like I said, I think it's kind of a framing issue of a real picture of success. It's that might be something that helps people, like you said, while they're on the street, while they're looking for a program,
Mm-hmm.
while they're getting their stuff together to make some changes in their lives, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe even long term for some people. But I think it's being painted as the means to an end, and it's
not the cure. We haven't found the cure.
yeah, it's not the pharmaceutical. I don't know if there's a pharmaceutical answer for what seems to be a pharmaceutical problem. I don't know if you can fix dependence on drugs with dependence on different drugs. I don't know. Maybe in the future they'll be able to, and it'll be productive, but I haven't seen any real compelling evidence that this is the means to an end, and this is going to be the answer to our addiction problem in this country. I don't see that. But I agree with you that it definitely has a place, and I've seen it save some lives, and I've seen it help some people. But
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's, like you said, it's not being framed correctly.
Right. All right. So I guess, we can talk about, somebody said, are you enjoying the mental health unit? How's the free food?
It's not bad,
The little ice cream cups aren't bad.
it's not bad. Yeah, I don't really know what to say about it now. You and I have both been in detox facilities. The one that you and I were both in, doubled as a mental health unit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it wasn't a terrible place, for me. It was something that I could do to get people off my back about my using. Like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I'll go clean up there, and I'll get left alone for a while. The real work doesn't start until you leave that place. I mean, that's when the work really begins. And I don't know how you feel about that, but
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's, just thinking about it, I think that having the mental health unit combined with drug detox is probably not the best, like, institutional structure to have. I think probably having, like, and they do have drug detox specific places, but a lot of times if you're like in danger of having a seizure, like I was, like detoxing from alcohol and benzos, like you need medical supervision. So I think that, our probably the way that things are heading with, in our country with drug addiction is like having more specific, more tailored like resources for people with addiction. So I think putting people with drug addiction in the mental health unit and combining all, drug addiction with all the other um, mental disorders and people that need to be in a mental hospital, it's probably not the right move. But I definitely spent, a fair amount of time myself after, there were several times where I like threatened suicide and ended up in the mental health unit. In reality, I was just sort of like, depressed, miserable, looking for an escape for whatever situation I was currently in. And I was, detoxing. So,
yeah.
yeah.
You know what surprised me while I was in there was um, I went in there to detox, and I actually refused the Suboxone when they tried to give it to me.
Mm,
And my motives for doing that definitely weren't pure. I thought that if I refused medication, they would discharge me sooner, and I
mm-hmm,
could get the hell out of there. And I was right about that. They discharged me much sooner for refusing it, but I was surprised at how hard they pushed me to take more drugs. I mean,
mm-hmm.
they really, really wanted me to take drugs, and I think that kind of, and I don't know how it's changed since then. Obviously, that was over 8 years ago. But
Probably makes their job easier.
well, it makes their job
Yeah,
easier, and I think it might have something to do with funding, from the insurance companies. If you can't prove that somebody has a medical need to be in
sure.
a medical facility, it's difficult to get the insurance companies to pay for it. I think it sheds a little bit of light on some of the problems, but there are good social model detoxes as well, where they don't necessarily push you being on more drugs. It's more of a safe place for you to detox
Mm-hmm.
while under medical supervision. So that's a
Right.
positive thing for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, next one. Kind of combine these two. So, do you like this life when it does not have to be this way? There is hope and you can quit with help.
That's a complicated question because,
Mm-hmm. Not
like,
everybody. Yeah.
well, and like I said, I personally, I believe I was born with this disease.
Mm-hmm.
So for me to sit here and say there was no part of me that enjoyed my life during that period would be dishonest.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have an addictive personality that I've found ways now in my life to satisfy through, whether it be physical fitness or, helping people or finding jobs that are fast paced and working, solving a lot of different problems. Because in the moment, I kind of like the me against the world narrative that I painted for myself while I was on the streets. It was like, I felt like the whole world was against me. I had to find a way to get drugs. I didn't have any money, and I was going to figure it out. And it was an exciting lifestyle. Now, on the other end of that, I was hurting everybody I loved. I was not making any progress, and it was, punctuated by periods of real depression and shame for what I was doing. But
Right.
in the moment, did I enjoy figuring out how to get drugs and
Mm-hmm.
finding my drug dealer, or even selling drugs, or what I would, all the things I would do to feed my habit? In some cases, yes. Yeah, I did enjoy it. It's about finding a way to fill that void in recovery, because there is a void once you get sober.
Absolutely. Um, yeah, I think you're pretty spot on there. I think you can quit with help. Like, why don't you change something about it? I think like there has to be a willingness. Again, we talked about that a little bit. And the other question here was, what causes you to reject the truth about addiction without trying solutions being given to you? And it all comes down to willingness, like, um, honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness is what they talk about in the program. And, if you're not at that point where you're willing to do something about it, and um, you have some form of desperation or willingness to change, like, yeah, there's really not much beyond that you can do. Again, you can't control somebody. They may realize very well that they don't like this life. They know it doesn't have to be this way, but they're not willing to do anything about it. They're kind of stuck in that cycle. So yeah, that's actually the end of our questions here. And yeah, thanks everybody for participating, and we will definitely do this again. Hope it was helpful to hear our perspective and a little bit about our experience. And again, we're not doctors, but we're both recovering addicts and have been clean and sober. Jared 8 years, myself 7. So we've kind of navigated these waters and want to help people however we can. So yeah.
Well, thanks, Brooks. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Yeah.
And
Everybody who watches, please like and share, and post on the forums if there's any other questions or anything you guys would like us to talk about. Please let us know. We would love to hear it.
yeah, absolutely. And best of luck to everybody with their loved ones as well. There's definitely a solution out there. It won't always be this way, hopefully. So
all right. Thanks, Brooks.
thank you. Bye.